this slime really is thick, isn't it? Oh, okay guys, I can do it off now. Can I come out? Can someone let me out, please? Hello? Hello? Someone? Oh, it's unlocked. Oh, 100 years into the future, Jesus. Oh boy, this house still looks pretty good actually. Oh, hello. Shaun, you are still looking good. Now, how art thou Völsungur doing? To the laptop. Oh, exciting stuff. Gone for 100 years. Right, let's have a gander. What the heck has gone on here? Where's my stadium? I'm a club. I was the only club legend. How could you demolish my stadium? Right, I don't like this. Oh, I don't like that either. Oh dear. Oh dear, dear, dear. Might need a beer to get through this one. Back to Husavik Heroes here on Shaun Does FM. I hope you've been doing well in the few days since we have last been here for this series, and today we look forward 100 years, so it has been a little while. In game we actually sim forward a little bit further than we said we were going to. We said we were going to do 60 years, get forward to 2100. In the end, actually decided to end up doing 100 years. So if you are looking forward to this episode, then do remember to go down below, leave a thumbs up on the video, and if you haven't done so already and are enjoying this sort of content here on the channel, and of course looking forward to FM23, then also remember to hit that subscribe button and turn that notification bell on as well, so you do not miss out on any of the FM23 action once the beta does drop, which might only be in a few hours if it hasn't already happened by the time that this video does come out. But it is time for us to go over and have a look at the save. This is exactly where we did end things at the end of last week, as you can see right off the back of those awards that we did see for the Champions League. I have actually found out that it is a bit better to resign instead of retire, to keep an eye on what has happened in this save. And we'll just go forward in small steps early, and then we'll do a big jump towards the end, because obviously we want to keep an eye out on how things do go after we leave, which of our players do leave the club, which of our players do still perform well, how things go in the Champions League under the new manager. And from there we can start to increase the increments just a little bit in this looking forward video. So first things first, it is time for us to resign here at Völsungur. We'll see what comes off the back of that, if anything in fact does happen. As you can see, Damon has retired from Völsungur. The board quick to pay tributes. It is quite nice to see after 19 or so years at the club. I think it was just under 20 years, but nonetheless, that was a good spell there at Völsungur. Of course, the club, as we left things, did have 5 Champions Leagues next to their name, 2 FIFA Club World Cups, 3 Super Cups, 17 top division titles, 15 Icelandic Cups, Molkebekerins, 18 Super Cups, and going down a bit further, 18 League Cups as well. Those are the titles that we do want to keep an eye out on during this looking forward period. As you can see, our former assistant manager, Ridley Higgins, out of Northern Ireland, is going to be the caretaker manager. And first things first, we are going to sim forward just a little bit and see who the new manager is and what they do here at Völsungur. And we have gone forward to Christmas Day here in 2040. It did take Völsungur a little while to find a replacement for me, so the caretaker manager was in charge for about 2 months. But as you can see, the replacement ended up being David Snorri Jonasson. He was the former manager of Nats KR. So of all the managers that we could have got to replace us here at Völsungur, being a 5-star reputation club, 3 time in a row Champions League winners, that's a little bit of a lackluster appointment. I think it is fair to say Nats KR haven't done too well in Europe so far in this save. The most recent high achievement really has been the fact they finished second behind us in the league this season before we did end things in this save universe. So a bit of an interesting appointment there, albeit some of the damage got done before he actually arrived. Our caretaker manager, the former assistant manager in Ridley Higgins, did sort of give him a little bit of trouble in terms of the transfer history. This is where things get a little bit interesting. Only 6 months into this looking forward video, which of course is going to go forward a whole 100 years. First off, we'll go to the transfer history and go back to the year of 2040. We'll just get rid of the bars up there. And as you can see, lots and lots of outs, and some quite notable outs as well. Some players that we signed a few seasons ago with that big transfer budget to try and make sure that the club would still remain successful when we left. Unfortunately, a lot of those players have been sold, as well as some really big other ones. So the last bit of business that we did in the Save universe was that loan of Marcus Jose in mid-May, and when the new manager took over, that was right on the 25th of July. So that business in between those two loans are the sales that our caretaker manager did make, and all of them not great, I think it is fair to say. Elaine Basicki, our starting defensive midfielder, he left for Newcastle, £66 million, so straight away a bit weaker in the DM role, albeit Cristiano Limoeiro was already at the club. Also another good player, Marcelo Jr., really promising Mazzala. He left for Leicester City for £32.5 million. Above that, Bruno Costa, the Ballon d'Or holder, he left for Paris Saint-Germain, £39 million. Not too sure what he's doing there, because Lassana Doumbia had a contract running out at the end of 2041. So getting rid of the backup box-to-box midfielder, not a great idea. Also got rid of Jacek Slabonski. That one I'm not too disappointed with. He was a player who didn't have a heap of potential. Sadine Musto, really promising centre-back. Not too sure why he got rid of him for £27 million, albeit quite a good fee, and that was the damage done by our caretaker manager. So already quite a bit to pick up there for the new manager coming in from Nats KR, and off the back of that, he sold players like Michael Riley, who, to be fair, wasn't getting a lot of game time here anyway, but above that, some quite useful players. Narek Voskania went to Cologne, Luis Herrera and Gabriel Capan both went to Manchester City, Agustin Agategere to Manchester United, definitely the biggest transfer in terms of the first team of this post-Shaun era window, and also Udan Shaiti going to Chelsea and Jakob Dobes to Barcelona. Both of those guys really good, young, promising players. Jakob Dobes was in line to be the box-to-box midfielder for us once both Bruno Costa and Lassana Doumbia did leave the club, so he has left us a little bit weak in the box-to-box midfield role. The one player that he did sign after we left was Jason Lambert from Servette. He looks like he's decent based on the attributes. Unfortunately, I have attribute masking on for this save, so it's not going to be too useful in situations like this. We can't really see how good some of these players coming in are, but at 18 years old, looking at those attributes, he looks like quite a promising player. But we've got a lot of players who have left the club going into that first European season under the new Völsungur manager from, of course, Nats KR. If we go over to the tactic, you can see he is also playing a bit of a 4-4-2. So it's a notable change here at Völsungur off the back of what we had with our 4-3-3. There is the team they have been putting out recently. Still quite a few of the players that we were using, but players like Moskowicz coming in, which isn't bad to be fair. He's quite a good centre-back, quite a promising one. Limoeiro is now at centre-back instead of defensive midfield because he's not using a defensive midfielder. And the wingers, Alagard and Alipour, both decent, young, promising wingers. So this team isn't too bad, but he certainly got rid of quite a few important parts, and also interesting to see players like Lapase and Menga as well as Basaroge are all on the bench. So maybe he was resting some of those players for the most recent game that they did play. But we'll go over and have a look at the schedule from his first half season in charge. In his first big test, he did win the Super Cup 4-0 against the Europa League champions in Leicester City. So a good start for him there, albeit once he did get to the group stages of the Champions League, that is where the wheels did start to fall off a little bit. A draw at home against Tottenham, backed up by ones away at Bayer Leverkusen, then at home to Inter Milan, meant that they did get off to a rough start, albeit quite a tough Champions League group off the back of that. A 1-0 win away at Inter Milan, which does look like quite a good result. But as you saw before, to start off the technically new season here in Iceland, we did lose to both Tottenham and Bayer Leverkusen, and that did mean we didn't even get out of our Champions League groups. That is a terrible start for the new manager here at Völsungur. I'd be quite surprised if he lasted long with that in mind, considering the expectation when we were at the club was to reach the finals of those competitions. And in the end, they've only just finished above Inter Milan into that Europa League qualifying place as well. But not a great first season in Europe anyway for the new manager here at Völsungur. And also, that is probably largely thanks to our caretaker manager getting rid of quite a few good players who were integral to our side here in our last couple of wins in that competition. But alongside that, he did pick up wins in, of course, the league. That was won quite comfortably, albeit, as you can see, they did actually lose a game for the first time in quite a while to Akranes, but I imagine by that stage that the season was pretty much done and dusted. And also, once we make our way back to the right screen, you can see that they did pick up the Malkabikaran 2-1 over Fylkir in the final as well. So we did pick up all the domestic trophies possible in that season, but not a good first European season, as we don't even get out of our Champions League group. We drop down into the Europa League. We'll come back shortly and see if we can pick up the first Europa League of the save off the back of that disappointing Champions League campaign. And going forward to the end of the first season without us in charge in Europe, unfortunately, no notable additions down there to the trophies won. That is because things didn't go well either in the Europa League knockouts. As you can see, the first knockout round, a 2-0 win against Fiorentina, albeit slightly disappointing there that they did not pick up a win in the second leg at home. But then they got defeated by Newcastle on penalties 2-2 in the second knockout round of that competition. So that is a big fall from grace off the back of winning the Champions League the prior season. So that is not a good start, albeit the FIFA Club World Cup is coming up. Hopefully the new manager can save face a little bit there and get us a win in that competition. And also to start off the season, we did win the League Cup and the Super Cup, albeit off the back of being knocked out of Europe early. Not too sure if that is too surprising at all, with our workload not quite being the same as it usually would be. So I think it's fair to say in the first season that we did leave European-wise, it was a bit of a disaster. And also another transfer update here as we are about to enter the second season where we are not in charge of Völsungur. And the exodus has continued. Christopher Allegard has left for Manchester United, Cristiano Lemierlo for Bayern Munich, Anderson Guehi, very promising right back, probably should have been in the first team if not for some registration issues over the last few seasons of this save. He's gone to Real Madrid, so that is a big loss in terms of a young, talented player. Silavistas not too bad going to Fiorentina. He was kind of a Fylkir quality player anyway, but players like Emil Holst, good promising player. Lasana Doumbia in the end did go to Man United in that January transfer window. Probably didn't want to sign a contract when that was expiring at the end of 2041, so I can understand why he was sold in January, albeit with those sales last year of both Dobbes and Bruno Costa, that does leave us pretty much bare in terms of box-to-box midfielders. So that is a very interesting transfer strategy, getting rid of all those players. Julio Rojas, not too disappointed getting 20 million for him off of Bayern Munich, not the most promising player. Volta, we didn't sign that long ago, and he's gone to Napoli for 19.75 million. Quite a promising right winger, and the two above that, players that we don't really need here anyway. But again, a lot of good players leaving here at Völsungur, albeit they have actually been replaced this time. He spent 208 million in that March transfer window that does open here in Iceland. Probably the most prized asset there is Maxime Vincent. He was quite a promising looking winger when I was in charge of this save out of Marseille. As you can see, that is quite a good addition, probably to replace someone like Agatigre or Christopher Allegard. So quite high on that transfer, even if it did cost us around about £62 million, could rise to £75 million. Also players like Pedro Calista joining for a decent fee from Borussia Dortmund. He is a left back, come centre back, as well as that Christian Villanello comes from Hellas Verona. He looks okay as a defensive midfielder, come regular attacking midfielder. Above that, another big fee spent here for Martin Nemec coming from Manchester City, a right back comes centre back. He looked okay. Julian van Leeuwen for £54 million from Cologne, quite a decent centre back, albeit didn't really think he suited too many positions that we use. Those sport, he wasn't quite enough of an aerial threat to play centre back for us, but at 26 years old, he should be in the prime of his career. And a couple of other cheap signings in amongst that as well. So it was certainly a big transfer window, but those players wouldn't have been able to play in Europe until this upcoming season, and ideally will improve a little bit off the back of what we just did there in that first season where we were not in charge, the former Nuts KR manager, butchering things a little bit, it is fair to say. And while we are here just 1 year off the back of where we did leave things, of course, towards the end of the save that we did do, Iceland for the first time in this save did actually qualify for the Euros. So we're going to just do a quick check-in on how the Iceland national team did get on in that first international tournament that they did make in the save. And they didn't do a bad job at all. They won their first game against Scotland 2-1, then drew 1-1 against Northern Ireland, followed up by a 2-0 loss to Romania. What that did mean, in fact, I can't even click on it, but obviously they made their way through to the knockouts to the second round, albeit had to face an Italy team who obviously will be a lot stronger than what we have here at Iceland at that stage of the save. So they lose 2-0 there in their first major tournament they have made so far in this save in the second knockout round of the Euros to Italy, and from there some mixed results in the Nations League B, and that does continue somewhat into World Cup qualifying, albeit 3 wins from 4, not too bad at all in a group alongside Italy. So yet again, Italy are proving Iceland's tormentors. Hopefully they can improve over the course of this 100-year sim. But we will start to progress just a little bit further now when we do go forward in this looking forward video, obviously moving forward a little bit more now that we've kind of seen how our caretaker manager and the new manager here at Völsungur have just destroyed what we built. Not too happy with that first season without us in charge. We'll now go forward 5 to 6 years and see what has happened with a little bit more time in charge potentially for that nuts KR manager if he doesn't get sacked. And we have gone forward 5 more years off the back of where we were previously. Surprisingly, despite the fact that we have not added another European title to our collection, the former nuts KR manager David Snorri Jonasson is still in charge, albeit as you can see by the tactic, a lot of new faces here at Völsungur. The only familiar one is Adam Saki, who is still there up front. So still a lot of change, thankfully. Still a 5-star reputation club. And you will notice as well, we have added a FIFA Club World Cup to our collection back in 2041. So thankfully, that is the big honour that David Snorri Jonasson has picked up in his time here at Völsungur. But in terms of the Champions League, if we go over to the schedule, you will see it's pretty much a tale of early knockout round exits. In the Champions League in 2046, we made the first knockout round, but got defeated 3-2 by Manchester United. We go back to 2045, yet again knocked down in the first knockout round, this time by Paris Saint-Germain. Back to 2044, we did get through the first knockout round, getting past Inter Milan, but off the back of that, PSG beat us yet again in the quarterfinals of the Champions League. To 2043, yet again a first knockout round exit, this time at the hands of Barcelona. And back to 2042, we made our way through, this time the first knockout round defeating Napoli, but then again losing the next one to Chelsea in the quarterfinals. So it's been a bit of a drop off since we have left the club so far in these 6 European seasons. That 1 year where we were down in the Europa League, and from there making the knockouts of the Champions League, but not doing a great deal. Thankfully, in terms of the domestic competitions, things are a lot happier. We have continued to be the dominant force in the islands dealt in. We go over to the Super Cup, just 1 loss in that back in 2043, but still a pretty good record, winning most of those, and over to the Malka Bikkerin as well. Our only loss in that competition coming in the most recent season in 2045, so doing a decent job domestically, but in terms of Europe, certainly a lot that could be better here in this save universe, albeit as you can see on screen, only really Adam Saki, who for some reason these days is the number 6, is in that first choice 11 here at Völsungur. These days have been a quick look at the transfer history over the past few seasons, just to see if there are any familiar names that have left the club. In terms of this most recent season, none that I can spot. The same applies in 2045, but hopefully when we go back to 2044, there's a few more familiar names, and indeed that is the case. Jonathan Berger, he left for Barcelona, as did Maxime Vincent's no long spell for him here at Völsungur. He left for Real Madrid, going down a little bit further. Kevin Vutas, who was quite a promising striker, who got a little bit of game time here in the latter stages of this save. He went to Dortmund. Victor Abeso, very promising player, who when he was here looked like he could be a good left back. We did sign in later stages. He has gone to Gladbach, and apart from that, a couple of other youngsters who left the club on free transfers like Florian Bonnefoy. So there's a few familiar faces there who did leave the club back in 2044 going to 2043. Actually not too many names that are overly notable in terms of our time in charge there that season, but back to 2042. A couple of notable ones. Jan Yves Lapasse did leave for Liverpool for £5.75 million, albeit at that stage of the save would have been quite old. Maurizio Menga also left for Real Madrid for £44 million, and probably a bit more concerningly, Ari Onswan. We signed him and he looked really promising when we signed him in that last season of the save. He left for Manchester United for £46.5 million. These days, not many players who we did have at the club are still here. If we go over to the players who are at the club and base them on age, because I think that is going to be the most sensible option. Benvenu Bayer is still here. You've got Adam Saki and Carl Vollen, and apart from that, it's pretty much an entirely new look squad and quite a slim one as well. So certainly that could be having an impact on these European runs, but at the moment, no European success, albeit the manager for some reason is still in charge and has stuck his way up to being a club icon despite that lack of European success, just that FIFA Club World Cup. And while we are here this time as well, a quick update on what the coefficient does look like now. We've gone forward one block of 5 years since we did leave things at the end of the save. Of course, we were in 7th and behind Portugal. I think it's fair to say that first couple of years did not go well after we did leave Völsungur. Iceland are all the way down in 9th, so they have dropped a few positions there from where we did leave things at the end of the save, and having a quick look at what has actually happened in the European competitions. As you would somewhat expect with the coefficient, no other Icelandic teams have made the latter stages of the Champions League, or at least the final, in those seasons where Völsungur also struggled. The same can be said for the Europa League, so still yet to make a real impact in that competition and going down to the Conference League, where of course Fylkir did win this in 2038. 39, yet again no Icelandic impact. So I think it's fair to say Iceland slightly on the regression 5 to 6 years into the save. Let's now go for 10 years and see if anything's changed at that stage. And we are now in the year 2050, where, as you can see, a new club legend, David Snorri Jonasson, despite the fact that still no UEFA additions to the club since he has taken charge. So that does feel a little bit harsh considering that I won 5 Champions League. Not too sure how he can be a legend alongside someone with my resume, but unfortunately Völsungur still yet to do much in the Champions League. If we go over to the competition tab, you will be able to see if they have made the last few stages of that competition over on the past winners tab, and unfortunately they haven't really gone close to still yet to really hit the highs that we took them to in those last few years of the save, dropping down to the Europa League, and they're not making an impact in that competition either. So still Iceland are struggling at the 10-year mark in the save universe, and that is only compounded by the fact that nothing much is happening down in the Conference League either. But the reason we are coming back at this stage is for a quick update on the coefficient. We have actually moved up slightly to 8th on the coefficient, going above Portugal. So given the results, that is a little bit interesting. Maybe the Icelandic teams getting a little bit further than they were in those European competitions without making a final or something like that, because it's a little bit of a game there for Iceland. So a little bit of encouragement there, moving up from 9th to 8th in the past 4 years. And also, I did see some notable names while simming forward who have won the Ballon d'Or. The last player that we did see win that award was Bruno Costa. Of course, that was the year before we won that final Champions League final. Off the back of that, Agustin Agategere was the winner. Of course, that was the year when he was still at Völsungur when we won the Champions League. Lasana Doumbia was the runner-up. In 2040, 2041, Agategere finished second behind Leandro, so no real Völsungur involvement in that season. The same can be said for 2042, 2043, a little bit different. Maxime Vincent was the runner-up, so good effort there by that quite good-looking new addition from the new manager in Lasana Doumbia after being sold. Finished third that season. Up to 2044, one of those young players who got sold early in the save, Jakub Dobes. He won it at Barcelona, so a bit disappointing there that he was one of those first players sold when the new manager did take charge here at Völsungur. Agustin Agategere, runner-up that season as well. 2045, Maxime Vincent, not too long that would have been off the back of leaving Völsungur, is the runner-up that season, and going up a few more seasons, he actually wins it in 2046 and 2047. So Maxime Vincent did turn out to be quite a good player. Unfortunately, though, that was at Real Madrid. Instead of Völsungur, Jakub Dobes, another former Völsungur player, to pick up that Ballon d'Or this time in 2048. And then in 2049, we finally get our hands on the Ballon d'Or again with Otavio out of Brazil, picking that up the left winger with 25 goals and 9 assists in 42 appearances. So still some Völsungur players being influential there in the Ballon d'Or, albeit could have been a lot more if the manager who took over from us had have kept some of those players around instead of selling them. I think it's fair to say the transfer business since we have left so far has not been the greatest. And the Goal 50 also features some notable former Völsungur players, as you can see. If we go up to 2042-43, Jakub Dobes also picked this up, as well as in 2043, 44 with Lasana Doumbia. The runner-up Maxime Vincent won it in 44-45 with Dobies as the runner-up. Leandro wins it the next few seasons, but Jakob Dobies was runner-up both of those seasons. And of course, Maxime Vincent did finish in third place, and then Jakob Dobies wins it the last 2 years when he is at Barcelona. So as I said, certainly some players that we did have at the club who could have made a real impact on those last 10 years and maybe help Völsungur and Iceland to a little bit more success. But now we'll go for another 5 years and see if things start to get on the improve just a little bit more. And we are now in the year 2055, and still unfortunately no update to those UEFA trophies, still just the 5 Champions Leagues and nothing else. And as you can see, a new manager in charge as well out of Qatar in Rashid Al Shamari. So he takes over from that former Nuts KR manager. Interesting to see he's got a better reputation than the guy who did take over from us. So hopefully we can start to get back on the improve here at Völsungur with that new manager going over to the manager timeline, or history, I should say. He retired from management after 14 years and 139 days. In the end, though, pretty disappointing in Europe. Just that one FIFA Club World Cup that he did win, and apart from that, a lot of early exits as well as domestic dominance. So I do think he was a little bit disappointing when you consider what he did have to work with when we did give him the club, albeit, as I mentioned earlier, the caretaker manager certainly did not help things in those 2 months that he was in charge with those sales that he did make. But going over to see what has happened in the big competitions in the past 5 years, first off, we do have the Champions League, and we go over to the past winners. We did actually make a final in 2051-52, so a bit of sign of life there for that former manager of Nuts KR, but unfortunately we lost that final to Manchester United. So that is a little bit disappointing, but at least a sign of an improvement there as we make our first Champions League final since we were in charge going down to the Europa League. No Icelandic teams have done much in this competition in the most recent 5-year block. Very interesting to see Swindon Town a runner-up there in 2054-55 and down to the Conference League. And yet again, unfortunately, no sign of life there from the Icelandic teams either. But going over to the coefficient, we'll see if they've been just good enough in Europe to hold on to that spot in 8th. And indeed, there's been just a little bit of improvement. They've actually jumped up to 7th now, albeit Portugal are back above them. So things pretty similar to where we did leave things back in 2040, 15 years later. Hopefully we can start to see a bit more of a jump soon, and they can start to get back on track in an upwards direction. And going back to the club page, we'll just go back a few clicks, and if we go over to the tactics, you will now see there are pretty much none of our players here at the club. They have all been sold or retired. So these days, there's not too much to update you guys in terms of that. We'll go for another 5 years, just see if anything happens in the 20-year block. And we have gone forward now to 2060. So we've gone for the same amount of time that we're in charge in this save. Now we're in charge for 20 years, and now it's been 20 years without us in charge. And unfortunately, still no updates in terms of European trophies. So still yet to taste any notable success since we did leave the club back in 2040. The same manager is in charge in Rashid Al Shamari. Something which might be of note, our stadium has had a bit of an expansion these days. It can hold just shy of 30,000 people. So that is interesting to see that my arena has had a bit of an upgrade. But going over to have a look at how things have been getting on in Europe over the past few seasons, if we have a look at the past winners of the Champions League most recently, as you can see, no sign of Völsungur, and we haven't even made a final since then either. So it looks like that 2051-52 season might have been a little bit of a fluke. But going down to the Europa League, and nothing here for Icelandic teams either, and that is also the case in the Conference League. So again, a very unsuccessful period there in terms of trophies for the Icelandic teams. But going over to the coefficient, still making our way up that table little bit by little bit these days, up to 6th and behind those top 5 nations, albeit quite a gap to close to try and catch up with the likes of Italy, France, Spain, and especially Germany and England. So things are poised there decently. We're a little bit better off than we were at the end of the save in terms of the coefficient, albeit in terms of European trophies, things have certainly taken a step backwards. I think we'll actually go forward 5 more years, get quarter of the way through how far we are going to sim, see if anything changes at the 25-year mark, and from there jump forward to the 100-year mark in 2140. And we are now in 2065. As you can see, a few things in terms of the club here have changed a little bit. The bank balance, not in a good state, minus 16 million, albeit that could be because they have recently built a new stadium, named after Rashid Al Shamari, who unfortunately won absolutely nothing in Europe. I'm a bit offended by that, truth be told. I was hoping they'd just keep expanding my stadium, albeit these days probably quite old, but surely they could have named it the Shaun Does FM Stadium instead of the arena, because I'm not too sure if that manager does deserve one, only being a club icon. Not too sure if he does deserve a stadium named after him, if I am going to be selfish. But as you can see, yet again, no updates in terms of UEFA competitions, and we do have a new manager in charge in Makilis Mikhail out of Cyprus. That is because the bloke who the stadium was named after, he left in 2061. He has gone and joined Newcastle off the back of his time at Völsungur. So really not too sure why he's had a stadium named after him, especially because he did only spend 6 years at the club. Off the back of that, the caretaker manager took charge for 21 days, and the current manager has been in charge for near enough 4 years. And going over to the results from the European competitions these last few seasons, yet again, unfortunately, no competition wins, and yet again, no Champions League finals. But if we go down to the Europa League, we did make the final in 2063-64, so that's our first final in Europe in 12 years since that 2051-52 final against Man United in the Champions League. But unfortunately, we lost to Offenbach, and they are from Germany, so that's not too disappointing, albeit you'd expect them to beat a team like that given our history in the Champions League. So that is a little bit disappointing. We missed out on a Europa League. We would have been the first Icelandic team to win the Europa League if we did pick that up. And going down to the Conference League, things are a little bit better, because just in this past season, HK have won it, and they defeated Manchester City in the final. Quite surprising to see Manchester City all the way down in the Conference League. And also the year before that, Akranes made the final, losing out to Barnsley. So it's certainly a weird universe here in 2065. But finally, some Icelandic teams are making the finals of Europe a little bit more consistently, and HK have become the second Icelandic club to win the Conference League, of course, off the back of Phil Kerr winning it in the second to last season when we were in charge in the save back in 2038-39. With those finals, I'm hopeful that the coefficient does look quite good, and it is actually a bit of a regression, which is a little bit disappointing. We have dropped from 6 down to 7, but certainly in terms of the clubs, looks like things are starting to trend upwards, even if the coefficient doesn't quite reflect that. But I think now it's time for us to just send forward a big amount. We'll come back at the 100-year mark and see if things do change, if we can actually pick up some success in UEFA at Völsungur. And this is the big one. We have gone forward 100 years now off the back of where we did end the save. We are now in 2140, and we have a lot to cover off at this point of the save. So first things first, obviously, we are going to go and check out Völsungur. Have they added to the European titles, which unfortunately they had none when we did last see things back in 2065? And the answer to that is a resounding yes. As you can see, now they have picked up 12 Champions League titles. The thing certainly picked up off the back of that first 25-year block since we did leave the club. They have also picked up 109 Islands Dealings. That obviously means they've continued to win the title most years since we did leave the club. Obviously not every year. There's a few years there where they have not won the title, notably in 2136 and 2137, back-to-back years without a league title. But for the most part, they have continued to win that. Have the club, they have now picked up 7 FIFA Club World Cups, 83 Malka Bickerins, 3 Europa League titles. So we have got some Europa Leagues now to add to those Champions League titles. They were all prior to 2100. We've won the UEFA Super Cup now 9 times, the Super Cup in Iceland 96 times, and also the League Cup 92 times. So certainly really building up those domestic trophy wins, and also finally have added some UEFA competitions to that list as well. And we also have a massive stadium these days in Husavik, just shy of 90,000 people, albeit it has been named after David Snorri Jónasson. He was the manager who first took over from us. That seems a little bit weird because his biggest achievement was winning a FIFA Club World Cup. I suppose it's better than naming it after the bloke who didn't win anything in Europe, but still would have been nice if they went back to my name. I think it is fair to say, with those 5 Champions League titles next to mine. But in terms of the managers who have been in charge since we were last here, all the way back when Mikhail was in charge, we had a caretaker manager. Off the back of that, then Greg Deng was in charge for 7 years. His most notable achievement was a FIFA Club World Cup, but he also picked up a Europa League as well. So probably the best manager that we did have at the club since we were in charge at that stage when he was in charge between 2073 and 2080. The next manager who we did have in charge for a decent period of time was Murat Özdemir. He was in charge for about 4.5 years, and unfortunately he won nothing of note in Europe. Going up a bit further to Luigi De Jesus, he was in charge for just over a year and was also a guy who didn't win much in terms of Europe. Off the back of that, we have Paulo Moriana. He was in charge for near enough to 12 years. Unfortunately, his only major award was the FIFA Club World Cup back in 2093 off the back of the next caretaker manager. It was Hector Cifuentes, and he again did not win much of note, albeit interesting to see that the Multibickerin is listed as a bigger achievement than the Europa League. So that's a little bit funny there, but he did actually win the Europa League, so probably one of the better managers since we were in charge. Off the back of that, Gabriel Braga was in charge for a year and a half at the start of 2100. Again, a manager who did nothing in terms of the UEFA competitions. The next serious manager we had was Murat Özdemir, and he won a fair bit, it is fair to say, but yet again, nothing in Europe. And then things must get serious with these last two managers who both have spent a long time in charge. First up, we have Filippo Gezzi. He did win a Champions League as well as a FIFA Club World Cup. The Club World Cup was in 2121, and going down a little bit further, trying to find this Champions League win, and those were in both 2115 and 2114, and he also picked up the Super Cup in 2114 as well. So definitely the best manager that's been in charge of Völsungur since we were there. And above that, Robert Ornhannesson. He must have won quite a few Champions Leagues, considering that we do have quite a few to make up, to take that number up to 12. If we go down a bit further, he won the Champions League and the Super Cup in 2133. Going down further, the Champions League also in 2130, 2129 alongside the Super Cup. We go down a bit further, and he also did that Super Cup double in 2126 and 2125. So certainly Robert Ornhannesson has been the best manager at Völsungur since we were in charge, and with that record, you could argue he might actually have done a little bit better than we did, considering that he has spent less time in charge at the club, albeit we spent a few years, of course, taking the club up from the third division of Iceland. So things have certainly improved here in the save over the past 75 years since we did last stop in for a check. If we go over and have a look at the past winners of the Champions League, obviously we did just reel off when Völsungur won it, but as you can see, also lost a few finals. 2135-36 to Villarreal. We go down a bit further in amongst that block of trophies that they did win. They lost the finals in 2130-31 to Man United, and also to the same opposition in 27-28. So still that rivalry with Manchester United in European finals does exist. Going down a bit further, they lost the final to Newcastle in 2110/11, and below that, it was a fairly lean spell in terms of European success, at least in terms of the Champions League. They did lose a final back in 2074-75 to Real Madrid, as well as 2070-71 to Real Madrid. And going down a bit further, we're getting back to where we did just look at previously, but Völsungur have certainly improved recently in the Champions League, going forward 100 years from where we did leave things in the save. Going down to the Europa League, obviously Völsungur have also featured in this competition, but finally other Icelandic teams have actually picked up this competition as well. You can see Völsungur made the final back in 2137 and 38, but HK, they won it back in 2134-35, defeating Southampton there at the London Stadium. Also, it was an all Icelandic final in 2131-32, which is very cool indeed. Phil Kerr got the better there of HK. Going down a little bit further, we'll just keep an eye out here for some more interesting Icelandic teams who weren't featuring in Europe when we were in charge, and one of those is Breiðablik. They made the final in the 2126-27 and 24-25 seasons. Going down a bit further, HK won it in 1920 over Lugo, also lost the final to Man United in 15-16. So it looks like these days Iceland might be one of the more powerful nations in terms of world football, which would be very nice indeed. Going down a little bit further, Völsungur, of course, won it back in 98-99 over Hull City, and also HK, they lost a final to Arsenal in 91, 92, as did Völsungur Wrexham. In 88, 89, HK won it as well. In 84, 85, over Cosenza. Down to 79, 80, and Völsungur beat West Brom in a final, while HK lost a couple of seasons before that to Bayern Munich. And going down a bit further, we got the job done over Manchester City in the 68-69 final, and below that a little bit more, of course, was that loss to Offenbach. So some quite good success there for Icelandic teams in the Europa League, and going down to the Conference League, where things could get quite interesting in terms of trying to keep up, because there could be some quite obscure Icelandic teams down here potentially. Fylkir won their second Conference League in 76-77 over Holstein Kiel. Going up a little bit further, we'll just try and do this fairly quickly because the Conference League was a competition we didn't actually end up participating in that much, but going up a little bit, trying to keep an eye out on any Icelandic teams who do feature. Quite a barren run there for a number of years, but we continue to make our way up. And the next sign of life in this competition was 2116-17, when Breidablik lost to AC Reggiana in a final. But off the back of that, Vikingur Reykjavik, who were a team which kind of yo-yoed between the top division and the second tier, they pick up the Conference League there over Göztepe, so another Icelandic team picking up the Conference League, going up a little bit further. No signs of any more Icelandic teams up until right near the top, where unfortunately Vikingur couldn't make it a double. They suffered defeat to Reading in the 34-35 final, and then in the most recent season, Breidablik also suffered defeat. So despite making a few finals, they are yet to taste European success. They lose to Ayr United out of Scotland in the 39-40 finals. So certainly Icelandic teams doing a decent job in Europe in the 2100s, and that should mean that the coefficient these days does look quite good for Iceland. And holy hecka does it what, they are now up to 4th on the coefficient, in behind England, Spain, and Scotland. So Scotland have certainly risen up that table as well, but Iceland finished the simulation as the 4th ranked team on the coefficient tables. So obviously that will help them get more teams into Europe, which might be making that success a little bit more understandable. But they are these days above both Italy and Germany. Turkey, Portugal, Greece, and Slovenia make up the top 10. France have dropped all the way down to 13th on that coefficient table, which is very, very interesting indeed. But I think eventually, I think it's fair to say that we did put the building blocks in place so that Iceland could be successful, albeit it did take around about until 100 years going forward from when we left for that to become a reality. We'll also do a quick check-in on the awards like the Ballon d'Or, and quite a few Völsungur players have won this award. 2,136, Anthony Frank. Obviously, we're not going to be able to tell you guys much about these players because they are all new gens at this stage. He also won the award in 2,129. We also had Völsungur players pick it up in 2,127 there, a Colombian midfielder. 5 years in a row there between 2,121 and 2,117. There was also winners in 2,114, 2,110. A little bit of a patch there where we didn't have a winner, but 2,099 and 98. We go down further, and from there, quite a lean patch, all the way back to 2058, where Leopoldo Chinanato was a winner. And going back further, we have winners in 2054, 2052, and 2049, of course, when we did last check in on the Ballon d'Or. And in terms of the goal 50, there's actually been no winners of this since we did last check in quite a while ago as well. So the Ballon d'Or has certainly been a good award for us as Völsungur, but in terms of the goal 50, that one, not quite so much. It is fair to say, but in terms of the best goalkeeper, there's been quite a few Völsungur players win that as well as HK ones as well. So we're still getting players who pick up these big awards, and that is largely thanks, of course, to the fact that Iceland are now one of the best nations in terms of the European coefficient. As you can see there, quite a strong block of Iceland having the best goalkeepers in the world in their league. And going down a bit further, as you can see, Völsungur are popping up quite a bit in terms of that award that we were winning quite a bit as well back when Carl Vollen was here at the club. As you can see, he was picking it up just after we left, and of course just before we left as well. And if we have a look now at the Icelandic national team, this is where things get really, really interesting. They were pretty dire throughout most of our save, down around the 77 mark, and as I said, only making the Euros. That was their one big competition qualification back in 2040, but these days they are ranked 6th, so that is a heck of an improvement there for Iceland as a nation. If we go over to their history in competitions, unfortunately, they have not won anything major for the senior team, but as you can see, some real interesting awards there in terms of World Cups, Euros, and the Nations League. Unfortunately, they lost the 21-30 final of the World Cups. They were so close to being the World Cup champions. Were Iceland, they also finished third in 2,138. So at the moment, Iceland is in a really good period in 2,140 in the Save Universe. Also runners-up at the Euros in 2,128. So around 10 years ago now, they were certainly having a golden era. It is fair to say. Nations League runners-up in 2,139 and also finished third in 2,129 and 2,133. So the national team doing a really, really good job, but unfortunately still yet to pick up a major trophy. But if you go forward a few more years off the back of this save file link, which I will leave down in the comments, they should be able to knock that one off fairly soon, either with the Euros or the World Cup. And we'll finish this off by having a quick look at the best 11s for both Iceland and for Völsungur 100 years into the future. Obviously, most of these players aren't going to be too recognisable, as we didn't actually have that many Icelandic players at the club. But as you can see, our backup goalkeeper towards the end of the save, Axel Ormpor Valdsson, he is still in there as the Icelandic best goalkeeper in the Save Universe. He retired as a player at 40 years old, left Völsungur in 2041, so not that long off the back of when we did leave the club. Off the back of that, he went to Lille, Bologna, Sheffield United, and West Brom. So even though he did play at a time when Iceland weren't that great internationally, he is still in that best 11. And also on the bench, Ori Porhalsson. Very interested to see how he ended up as a player. He was quite a young, promising striker towards the end of our save. He left the club in 2041 as well, so it's a little bit disappointing, albeit went to Paris Saint-Germain between 2041 and 2057, so a big career there at PSG for the young Icelandic striker, and he netted 165 goals in 455 appearances. And going over to what the Völsungur best 11 does look like in 100 years' time, there are just two players still there from our time in charge, and it's a bit of a top and tail situation. Carl Vollen is there in goal. He made 579 appearances for the club. Obviously, before those FIFA Best Men's Goalkeeper and Golden Glove awards, he was always going to be a strong candidate. In the end, he actually retired at Völsungur, unlike a lot of the players who we did have at the club. So that is very nice to see. He was there in between 2034 and 2050. So really good work there from Carl Vollen, retiring as a Völsungur player. Things you like to see. And going down to the strikers, in there, of course, is Aram Saki, 487 appearances, 494 goals. He has been overtaken by a few players these days in terms of the goals, but the strike rate, very, very good in terms of games played compared to those other guys. He retired at 38. He was at Völsungur until 2048, spent 2 years at Valencia to finish his career, but for the most part of his career, he was a Völsungur player and one of the better ones of the save as well after we signed him from Raja Casablanca. But they are the only two Völsungur players in that overall best 11. A little bit surprising that players like the Sana Dumbia did not keep their spot in that team, but obviously recently a lot of success in those European competitions for Völsungur, so cannot complain about that at all. And I think that's where we're going to leave things for this looking forward video. Hopefully it hasn't been too long, but we did have quite a bit to get through. A little bit of a lull there initially off the back of us leaving, and some very interesting departures, but eventually they got their act together, especially with the last few managers, and we now have 12 Champions Leagues next to our name and all those other titles as well. The Club World Cups, the Europa League, the Super Cup as well. So we have now won every European title with Icelandic club teams. Just the national team who have got pretty close to picking something up, but unfortunately haven't quite got the job done. But in terms of a Build a Nation save, I think we did a pretty good job once we did eventually sim forward 100 years. If you did enjoy this video, as I said, probably a long one, but do remember to go down below, leave a thumbs up on the video, and if you haven't done so already and have enjoyed this series here on the channel, also remember to hit that subscribe button and turn that notification bell on as well, especially with the FM23 beta just around the corner, where we are going to take charge of Liverpool and try and win the quadruple or nothing. Hopefully there'll be something if we don't win the quadruple, but nonetheless, that is what is coming up next on the channel. And until FM23, thank you very much for watching. Keep on keeping on, and I'll see you then. Cheers.